Oh, that seems like another life.
How lovely that was. I think our last burst of inspiration.
Right.
Speaking of inspiration, we have Dhruv here as well. Hey Dhruv, can you hear us?
Perfect. Cute. Hey Mansi. Hey everybody.
Hi Dhruv.
Meet you.
So
Great to meet you. Looking forward to the chat.
We're waiting on Sandeep. I think he'll probably take a minute or two because we started the room a little bit early, hoping that people kind of filter in. But yeah, let's give it a little bit of time.
Sure. What time did you start? I was hanging around and then it said start the room and I thought I was starting it.
Generally, we probably look at starting it about a minute or two before 9, but I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter. Happy to start it a couple of minutes before time and just, hope that people can kind of trickle in because it's good for people to kind of hear the first part of the room and of the event so that the context is set. And then kind of take the conversation forward. Obviously, as you know, Clubhouse people will keep popping in and out of the room.
Hey guys, this is Varun.
Hey Varun. Maybe we can get started with introductions in the meantime. So just really quickly, thanks so much to everyone who's listening in. Thanks for joining us today for our 5th India Consumer Huddle. Today we have a discussion on content and brand building. And naturally telling your brand story is now more important than ever because there's tons of competition in all types of consumer and consumer tech verticals. So we wanted to speak with the best in branding and content and get their take on how we can use content as a differentiator for brand building. So just quick introductions. We have Meeta Malhotra, founder of Hardcopy. The Hardcopy is a platform for brand builders and founders to access stories and case studies and resources. We also have Lulu Raghavan, an industry leader and MD at Landor & Fitch, a renowned branding and design agency. And we have Dhrupad Karwa, co-founder and CEO of Inspo, an AI inspiration partner for digital marketing and branding teams. And last but not least, we should have Sandeep joining ASAP, but maybe we can just get kick-started with a question since we have a couple of people who are already listening in. I think my first question to Lulu and or Meeta, and of course, Dhruv, feel free to pitch in here, is that we see every company becoming a content company these days, right? We see SaaS companies who have blogs, we see D2C brands running podcasts, we have VCs like Andreessen Horowitz that are creating media verticals in-house. But I would love to know your take on whether content is a necessity in building a brand. And if you agree, if you think yes, what are some examples of truly differentiated content that you've seen elevate a brand? And hey, we have Sandeep. Nice. Good timing, Sandeep. Hey.
So I think, the answer to that question is really very layered, Mansi. So let me take it one by one. Is content absolutely necessary to build a brand? I think the answer to that is no, not everyone needs to build a ton of content. But if you have a point of view which is going to interest the audience, your target audience, if you have a point of view and you have something to say that is of interest to them, which is not blatant promotion of your product or brand, then there is a massive advantage, particularly in today's digital world, in being able to create content, because it just provides this inbound funnel. It brings people to you rather than you going to them. And it brings in a lot of organic visitors. It creates a lot of buzz. It really speaks to the nature of the digital medium. So if you can create content, then it's wonderful. And, honestly, content creation has been around much before the internet. So the most oft-quoted example is the Michelin Guides of 1900, best example of content marketing. So it's hard to do well, but if you can do it, then it's a massive brand advantage.
Hey guys. Hey,
Jason,
Lulu, hi Lulu. Sorry guys, I was a little late. Hey Sandeep.
Hi, Sandeep.
Sorry. We got started a second on the conversation. I asked a slightly broad-based question on whether content is a necessity to establish brand. And if yes, then what are some examples of truly differentiated content that have really helped build and elevate brands? So we'd love to hear from you, Lulu, Dhruv. Feel free, anyone to kind of pitch in here.
Yeah, actually, one thing before we get looking at the different people we have involved, and just it occurred to me that based on the last conversation that Mita and I had, and knowing what Drew's up to at Hyperjam, these are both people who have this idea and thought that I think is going after trying to productize the service that exists. And I know that Drew might say, look, we're trying to enhance it, and then we should talk a little bit about that. But I think that it's interesting that there's a movement now, and Lulu, I'm actually going to ask you about this, because I think there's a lot of people going through the change how the work gets done in the creative industry, and actually take it and try to automate it in some way. And how do you feel about that? Do you think that's happening? Do you think that's good? Are you accelerating that change? Is it something you guys are fighting? How's that playing out?
Sorry, you have to repeat the question. Somehow I lost you. I don't know if it's me or everyone's losing you.
Yeah, I actually felt like you cut in and out there. So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just asking that. I think that Drew and Mita are both working around this idea of how to productize the activities around branding and the activities around the creative process. And I would say that I'm not sure that anyone necessarily believes that you can totally remove the creative in the creative process, but there's a lot going on in that area. And I guess sitting within a creative agency that has kind of built a business with lots of people doing lots of great things, do you see that as a good thing, a bad thing? Is that something you guys are accelerating or thinking about? How are you approaching it? How are you thinking about it?
That's a really great question, Sandeep. No, this is a really hard one because every product, every dream for a business is so different. Every process that we apply for a different entrepreneur is different. And I would say that while there have been attempts to streamline, to productize, it actually hasn't been that successful because the very nature of trying to arrive at something super relevant, super differentiated means that for every project that you're working on, you have to do something quite different. Inspiration may arrive in many different ways. And I think while there is an interest in driving efficiency to try to streamline and productize, I think it takes away that creativity which makes the whole development of the brand so unique and interesting. So we have tried to productize it, but in the instances where we have, the output sometimes is less inspirational. So I would say the part that's getting more productized is more the downstream, not the upstream, where you really have to work much more closely with a variety of stakeholders to arrive at why the brand exists, what it stands for, what difference it's going to make in the world. And all those parts of it really can't be standardized. That's my view. So downstream management of the brand, execution of the brand can be productized a lot more. So I would differentiate upstream and downstream in brand development.
You know, it's you said a word that I know that Drew is probably itching to get on. You said it's not very inspirational. And this is actually the crux of a lot of what we've talked about in what Drew is up to with Inspo and what's happening there. And so this idea of how you find inspiration and where it comes from, and you know, I think it's there's been a lot of serendipity that's involved in it in the past, and I guess it sounds like you're also saying that, listen, quite honestly, it's the people that matter in that. You find some really interesting people that have some interesting thoughts, and they're able to create something that can actually kind of speak to a broader base of people, and that's unique. But Drew, maybe you want to chat a little bit about what your view is on inspiration and how to actually maybe productize it.
Yeah, sure. So in many ways, I completely agree with what Lulu said, actually, right? And generally, I think just to take a step back on this entire topic, I actually think it's quite dangerous that most people today in the industry still has this kind of have drawn these battleground lines between human creativity and technology, right? And the word that we keep using is automate. And every time I hear that in the context of creativity, I feel like a little part of my soul just gets eroded, because I think the operating word here is augment, right? I don't think, if there, I know as an insider, there are people who are building a lot of creative AI tools that are seeing them as replacements to core parts of the creative process. And I'm philosophically super opposed to that, because I think if you're looking to take away, the creative, then there is no creative process. And I know that's a completely other philosophical rabbit hole that we can go down on another day or another time in the conversation. But I think, like I said, I think the key word is to augment. And can we build tools to actually augment human creativity? And as Nita said something in an earlier answer, right? A lot of this stuff isn't actually new. Like, content isn't new. In the context of the internet, we get carried away thinking that so much of this stuff is like we're seeing for the first time, but it's not. We're just seeing it in a context and a level of scale that's unprecedented. But the creative process has been around a really, really long time. And since cave art, we're seeing, gradually better and more sophisticated tools to help us express ourselves. So I think it's really about, just building tools that augment and not automate, and shifting the conversation away from like man versus machine and to just, man and creative, and how can machines and technologists and tool builders evoke more and more human creativity? Because we've already seen it for so many parts of the creative process. If we were to kind of roughly break down the creative process into 3 steps, and this is a really crude analogy, but just bear with me. I think the first step is creative thinking, right? Where it's all about thinking, ideation, brainstorming. The second stage is actually doing and making creative. And then the third stage is distribution and monetization and getting the word out there. Around these latter 2 stages of execution and distribution, we've seen so many amazing tools like, Photoshop, Canva, Behance, just to name like a few. And every day there are new ones coming up. And I think these are definitely to be celebrated. And at least with Inspo, we feel that there is room at the beginning, right at the beginning of that creative process, to make a difference and build something that augments. So that's more or less my take on it.
Actually, Nita, you and I had an interesting conversation about how, brands just seem to not necessarily find interesting ways to communicate what they're up to. It seems to fall a little flat in many areas. And actually, even in the startup ecosystem, the question of, is the product differentiating enough really to be a brand, or is it really just a lot of marketing noise around it? And it sounded like you're on a bit of a quest to see if we can create a system and a process to actually help more people think about it in a better way. And actually, if I were to say, you're not necessarily trying to productize the process, you're maybe trying to productize the thinking, if that's one way to think about it. Would you look at it that way?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to share, is maybe productize the thinking, or just share best practices that haven't been accessible to a very large portion of entrepreneurs, right? So Lulu and I come from the world of bespoke high-end consulting services, but how many entrepreneurs can really access those? And what I found is that there are really 2 areas where entrepreneurs falter when it comes to brand building. And one is that they try and emulate big companies, right? And that's never going to work, because if you're not differentiated enough, like you said, Sandeep, they're going to fall flat. And the second thing is that they think of brand as something that they'll do later. They'll catch up to it. But right now they just want to sell, and that's the other big mistake because then it's just a leaky bucket. You're just going to keep acquiring customers and you're going to keep letting them go. So I think that if more of these entrepreneurs at an early stage really understood what this whole process was about, it would just be so helpful. I think we would see less failures. I'm very convinced of that.
I think just to build on what Meeta has said, Sandeep, she's absolutely right and has hit the nail on the head. A lot of entrepreneurs who we meet think of brand as a communication thing or a marketing thing, but that's a very narrow scope of the brand. Brand is really existential. The entrepreneur has emerged because they have a point of view. They've seen a gap in the market or they want to do things differently. They've identified a massive opportunity. Articulating that and creating not just a functional product, rooted promise, but really connecting with that end consumer. That's really what brand is. It's connected very deeply to the business. It's not advertising or colors or logo. Sandeep, if entrepreneurs really got that, I think so much of their work would be done because we give them clarity in decision making. And even frankly, in pitching to you guys, why you exist, how are you going to create that consumer base? And then how is that consumer base going to build your brand, which is going to create the valuation for your business?
Yeah,
brand and business are very related.
I agree with you 100%. I think that people like us actually are a cause of the problem, quite honestly, in the sense that we show up, we take a business that's interesting, that's found some sort of a gap, an entrepreneur that has gotten somewhere on nothing and figured out how to communicate with people. And then suddenly they get money and they feel like growth needs to happen in a certain way. And they start to I think, lose track of the path they were on the beginning. But that's a reality of it. And I think the people that can balance that effectively and actually build the products and continue to focus on it are able to make a difference. But I think that, and I want to ask, actually, we've seen the market for a while as well here, that do you think it's been net positive or net negative in terms of the global competitors coming in, how then therefore companies are actually thinking about what they communicate and what they build? Are you finding that in general the game has gone up, or has overall we continue to play at perhaps a lower place in terms of how we think about that balance between product and marketing dollars versus true brand as the experience would go?
In my opinion, the game is, I don't know if Lulu agrees, but I think the game has gone up with global competition. That's always the way it is, right? If you have more sophisticated competition that comes in with well-established brands, whoever is in the local market has to step up their game. So as the game gets more sophisticated, you have to think about playing a more nuanced game. You can't just be price cutting or relying on product features, because the realization sets in that will only take you so far.
I would agree to a certain extent. I think at the surface, the presentation of the business, the presentation of the brand certainly has improved. If you see D2C companies today, their website, social media, app, all of that, fast superior. And I think everyone's learning from global brands. But if you go many levels below, if you really think about the brand experience, the UI UX experience, the overall experience of the brand, I think there's a lot more, a longer journey to go for the brand promise to truly be manifested in a differentiated experience. I think that connect, not everybody is still making. And then also just the consistency of the experience. The global brands are brilliant at that across all the channels. There is the consistent feel of the brand, the manifestation, the conscience of the brand. You just feel it very consistently, no matter which channel you're in. I think there's still a ways to go on that. So yes, the game has been up, but still true understanding of how brand has to be deeply seated within the organization in order to deliver something very differentiated. I think we can have a way to go on that.
Sorry to just butt in here. I just wanted to tell the audience that they can raise their hand and we can invite them up to ask questions to the speakers. And Sandeep, if I could ask a follow-up question to what Lulu said, would be, I totally hear you from a sort of brand experience position and how, and similar to what Meeta was saying in terms of how, the emergence of global brands have caused domestic brands to up their game in some way. But what are some examples of ways in which maybe domestic brands have used content to really establish a great brand experience? I would love to hear about real takeaways from either companies that you guys have worked with or through maybe companies and or agencies or brands you've seen use Inspo to really truly differentiate themselves from a brand experience point of view.
I think my favorite example is not perhaps something you were you were expecting, Mansi, but I think a brand that does storytelling brilliantly with one static image and one headline is Amul. So, there's just so many different ways to think about storytelling, and we shouldn't only be thinking of large volumes of content when we think about it.
But attention spans are so low right now. At least that's what, is the general trope out there. Brands are told to spread their content across multiple channels and, make different types of content from long form to medium, short form. So how effective is kind of building your brand across all these different types of content channels? And we hear a lot about short form content as well, and would love to understand like what you guys see in terms of the effectiveness of short form content in brand building. So I know that that's a separate question altogether, and so feel free to answer the earlier one as well as this.
I'll jump in on the earlier one, Mansi. One of the brands I think is doing a fairly good job is IndieLuxe. IndieLuxe is a platform for luxury brands with some Indian provenance. So in terms of how this platform is helping Indian luxury brands tell their story well, connect with audiences, I think is quite remarkable. Back to your question of different forms of content, short form, long form. I think one of the things that we have to recognize also is the strategy may be different for different brands. We're talking execution, but as Meeta said right in the beginning, maybe content's not needed for some brands. Maybe it's a different kind of experience on the app or on the website that's called for. So what we see is there's a lot of rush on the executional side with startups. So whether getting a campaign out or getting social media out, but there's not a lot of time that's spent up front in really thinking about why do we need to exist? Why does the world need yet another, women's apparel brand, for example, or another accessories brand? What is our unique point of view, or why do we exist? How are we going to be relevant to the consumer? I don't think, and Sandeep, please correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't know how hard entrepreneurs and their management teams are really thinking about this question. There's a lot of time spent on the executional components of marketing, but the strategic aspects of marketing and branding, I feel, and Meeta, please build on this as well, are very much missing.
I'll let Meeta go. I have some thoughts on this as well. Meeta, why don't you go ahead and I'll give you
No, so I completely agree, of course, but how do you, so this is my take, and having worked with many young entrepreneurs, not a lot of them come from backgrounds where they have done this kind of thing before, right? That's one. Second thing, Sandeep, I'm going to agree with what you said earlier that, the way the funding is done and the KPIs that are set up in terms of growth are very counterproductive to any strategic thinking, though, although I hope that's changing. Also, the system that we're all currently living in is designed in a certain way, right? So digital marketing is extremely seductive. And I've seen this with entrepreneurs. You get your first check, you turn the tap open, you open the tap a little bit, and then this wave of customers comes to your website and conversions start. So you're not even then, you're not even thinking about, okay, let me switch all this off, let me step back, let me think about why I exist. All of that has gone out the window. So there are too many factors working against this. It's not fair to expect it of them as something that will happen naturally.
Yeah, okay, look, so like I said, I owned up at the beginning the same, we're a culprit in this, and I accept that position. And I think that the whole game is set up and rigged towards saying grow faster, and that starts with the people who give us money want to see our businesses grow in value, so therefore to see them grow in value, you have to make them spend money on marketing, and it keeps going. And I think that there is a wave of that changing, and I think as realization settles in that it's short-lived differentiation when you're simply putting a lot of money into SEM or into social marketing, and people get that, okay, look, it's not going to last forever, and also the music will stop on the funding at some point. So let's say that these will be painful lessons, and they're getting learned, and things will shift. Now it comes back to, okay, well, now we have to build these brands, and we have to actually build these brands and build these companies more than necessarily just even the brands. And I think that comes back to product, and that comes back to product and how your product works and what that's going to be, and paying attention to that, and actually being able to create the pull for the product based on actually building something different, useful. And when you think about it fundamentally, especially for startups, and we can talk about established companies as well, but honestly, I'm not that aware or plugged into that world. But at least for startups, the proposition is you exist because, I think Google, you said this as well, there's a need that somebody has. Now, if you really have to keep spending a lot of money to convince them they have a need, maybe they don't have a need. And maybe it's not just about marketing your way or putting fancy colors around it to make it happen. You need to reassess the product. But I think one of the easier ways to kind of figure this out, and I think one of the great things actually about a connected world, is that there are community aspects of it that can feed into figuring this out better, and you have the opportunity to use those in some way. And actually, I wanted to chat a little with Drew here as well about this, because Drew, you saw some of this take place in the Haiku Jam community, and we've seen there's this mantra that exists, that content commerce community come together to actually build a business. Community can be a really powerful driver in that. And I don't know, even now, as we're thinking about Inspo and thinking about how to help brands think about social media marketing, I think there's a lens of community that needs to be incorporated into that. And maybe there's things that you saw from Haiku Jam that are relevant to think about for any brand in terms of how they're able to bring a community together.
Yeah, 100%. So I have quite a lot of thoughts on the last few minutes of conversation, so I'll do my best just to keep things structured. But just before I get into the Haiku Jam and community piece, all I'd add is that I think these work streams of brand and self-actualization and growth and monetization, I think one of the challenges are that entrepreneurs and founders like myself who are raising money and building businesses, we're thinking of them as sequential, right? We're thinking that one needs to happen first and then another needs to happen afterwards. Whereas brand is not actually a work stream, right? Brand doesn't really belong to one team. As has already been mentioned, brand is fundamentally an expression of who you are. And that pursuit of who you are, forget about companies, we should be all thinking about that through our entire lives, right? So I think that is super important. And also it's about, so much of it is about stakeholder management. I can say from my perspective, and Sandeep knows as well, we've had phases of both Haiku Jam and Inspo where we've been turning on the tap and growing, and also taking step backs and just reevaluating and actually asking ourselves those fundamental questions. And I found that a lot of conversations with my founder friends, they don't even realize that they have the permission to do this, right? Some people are so almost addicted to the drug of funding and the allure of it that they think that they have to keep growing at this percent week on week, and they can't actually like have a conversation to stop and to improve their unit economics or improve that funnel. So I think that's super important. So coming to a piece on community, and I find this word super interesting because it's like something that everyone uses now. And when we started HyperJam, I don't even think it's a word that was in our consciousness, right? And I think it's community building is not something that can be done with too much, agenda, or if you're too tactical about it, it's probably not going to work, right? So with HyperJam, for those who don't know, it's a social writing game, right? Where strangers around the world write together, and it's grown to over 1 million creators who've published like nearly 150 million lines in the platform. And before this was an app, before any of this started, I had this idea over a cup of tea in a London tea shop because I was feeling really sad one day because the previous company I was working on was failing. And there was no idea for a product. I was just like with my best friend, feeling quite low and writing short poems and scribbles and just random, little creative pieces in a notebook. And it was a really fun experience. And I thought it would be amazing, not just to connect with him, but to also connect with strangers all around the world through a deeper context than traditional mainstream social media. And then that's where we went from. So there was no plan to let's now build a community. For me, it was really clear that HyperJam fundamentally started offline. It wasn't, technology first. It was born in a tea shop on a notebook over cups of tea. And so we decided just as a ritual, that's how we were going to create most of our growth. And we did thousands of events over the last 5-6 years in so many different countries where people would actually, come in and write together on physical cards over hot drinks. And we've done this at venues like Google, the European Union, and so many other crazy places. So many of these folks didn't even know that, we were a technology first app. But for us, that became a real ritual, and it became a really, really retrospectively became a really fundamental part of our brand. So I think, again, just ask yourself that question, like, who am I, what do I want to do, and what am I here to do? And if you just do that, you'll find that there are probably other people who are just willing to walk that path with you. And in the process of walking that path with you, they'll also buy your products and make content and talk and connect. So yeah, I think it's just about figuring out who you are, what you're really good at, what you're trying to do, and then just rally believers around you and fun. And to me, that's community building. And then if you can give them ways to connect, that's a bonus. But I feel today one of the dangers is that people are treating it like a growth hack. And that's just not the case. Communities are not built in weeks or months. They take time and they take consistency.
Just to add there for community, Sandeep, I think one of the original super inspiring examples is Glossier, right? Started out as a community and then has retail stores. How amazing is that? It's the absolute reverse of product development, right? Starting with community. From an Indian perspective, I don't know how many of you are familiar with LEAP, which is a social professional network for women. And they are building a super strong private virtual community of women. And in fact, I see some of the LEAP members, including Tanvi, on this chat here. That kind of community building could really lead to greater monetization on so many fronts. Authentic content, ability to truly build community, I think is quite phenomenal. So just those two examples to bring to the attention of the audience. Glossier, from a global perspective, and something new and different in India, Leap.Club.
I think you're right. And Leap has done a job of even monetizing, right? So they figured out both sides of it in terms of providing an interesting product that people are actually willing to pay for. So it seems to be working really well there.
Yeah, I personally am a huge fan of Glossier as well as a consumer, but love the fact that they've kind of led this whole content to commerce model. I feel like Nykaa also does a decent job of moving their content consumers to commerce consumers. So just really quickly, we have Anand from the audience up. Anand, will you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. the reason I came on the speaker desk primarily because you guys talked about community and how community can then lead to, basically content leads to community, community leads to commerce. That's a greater path because it is a lot more secure. My question here is that, so with, for example, Glossier, sorry, I might be taking a little while to articulate it, but let me try and answer the question. So Glossier, of course, they started as a blog where people could find out what kind of products do celebrities use, and then they expanded from that blog to an Instagram, and that Instagram became massively big. They did a lot of user-led product generation where they asked that, hey, this is the product we are coming up with. They took a lot of feedback, and then they finally launched the product. What I want to know is that a lot of influencers have a community. So, for example, if you go in the early eras, you had Sanjeev Kapoor, who launched his own Wondership brand, and that did very well. In the global context, we have Kylie Jenner, who launched her lip kit, and she's now a billionaire. My question to the experts here is that if you have creators who are now leveraging their community in order to enable commerce, what advice would you give to them? Because what happens is, more often than not, the product doesn't turn out to be the differentiator. The community that the creator has is the differentiator. Hence, I'm wondering if some were to be doing that in India, what would be the context, or what would be the advice you would end up giving up to them?
Yeah, I'm going to start because I have a thought on this that, I don't know, unless, I think it's more of the same that exists in the world already. People who have distribution can think for a while that they don't need to worry about product differentiation. But I think at some point distribution will kind of balance itself out. So I get what you're saying in the sense that if I'm Kylie Jenner and I have a lot of following, or I'm somebody else now who says, I've got millions of people on my feed and now great, I'm going to start selling product. Sure, you can start, and I think you'll get to a certain degree. And actually, to one extent, you could go and look at, let's just say what happened with Micromax to an extent. They scaled up, sold product that was relatively undifferentiated. Suddenly we're hit with massively more undifferentiated products. The space got crowded, it got ugly, and it became hard to sustain. And so I would contend that at some point, whoever you are that has that influencer, who has that following, is pushing a product that is questionable in terms of its value or undifferentiated, it's not going to last. You may get some success, but I think at some point, something else has to keep carrying it, or you have to keep reinventing the reasons why people are growing and following you, and your scale becomes so large that it gives you the chance to actually invest in real product differentiation. That's my 2 cents, but I'm interested to hear what the others have to say.
Sandeep, it made me think of an example which I think is actually quite interesting. Let's see how it plays out. I don't know how many of you have heard of Anomaly, which is Priyanka Chopra's hair care brand. But it really seems to be founded on quite an important insight around chemical-free and sustainable packaging and all of that. I think that's really authentic and differentiated and seems like a very, very interesting space. She's not just saying, hey, I have millions of followers and let me create some brand. She's really creating, she's seen a gap in the hair care market and has created something quite interesting. Would love to hear what others think.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I was just going to, I don't have a comment on the brand yet. I think it's quite new, but I did want to say to Anand's question that, there have been instances in the past where Indian Bollywood stars have tried to launch brands, not with much success. They haven't really become a Kylie Jenner so I think that unless the product measures up, that is very, very short-lived. It's not going to last, because at the end of the day, people are not going to pay, you can tempt trial with that, but you can't sustain customers.
So I just want to answer the Meeta's question. I just want to add a context to that point. There's a difference between Bollywood and the people who are massively big online, as in mainstream stars versus the new age celebrities. The new age celebrities have a direct access to their fan base. and that turns out to be an important distribution channel. As in, that's some differentiation there. And one point I want to add is that Sanjeev, as in, of course, in the mainstream, you have two examples. One is Sanjeev Kapoor, who has launched Wonder Chef that does hundreds of crores of revenue annually, and then you have, as in, I know this, it's not one of the elite brands, but you have Baba Ramdev, who built a brand over 10 years on Asta TV, and now Patanjali is giving the competition to HUL and TV. So the context does exist. The Indian market has definitely not seen a Kylie Jenner happen.
Yeah, no, and also, no, so I think the point you're making on it is that if Wonder Chef, if the quality of Wonder Chef, was not better than, say, what existed in the Indian market to the alternatives, then Sanjeev Kapoor or no Sanjeev Kapoor, I don't think it would have been a success.
True.
That's, that's the foundation.
I think it also goes back to Sandeep's point earlier that product market fit is not there. The rest of it is just cosmetic.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you just mentioned Baba Ramdev, because funny that you just mentioned Baba. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just saying with the Baba Ramdev, I haven't heard that story and that topic come up in probably 4 years. And I think I remember going back 2014, 15, it was the biggest rage. It was the concern that everyone had, it's going to take over all of FMCG, and a lot went on. And I remember at that time also looking at their product range, and it ranged from Ayurvedic products to, I think at one point there was even jeans or something in the mix. And it was quite a wide range of stuff. And, I still stand by the idea that you need to, if you're going to take your brand in different directions with it, you need to have products that actually mean something, hold it together, and then you stand for something with it. The other thing for the Priyanka Chopra story, the analogy that came up, the Honest Company, which had launched, Jessica Alba was behind it. It was promoted as a safe product, products that are good for your family. And she was a kind of wholesome person who had just become a mother as well, and it was only the things that she would want to use. But I think ultimately it struggled because the differentiation was weak, the distribution was challenged, and it ran far ahead of itself on valuation, and therefore that also became a problem. So I don't know. I think sometimes some of these categories need some actual fundamental product differentiation, and hopefully some creative thinking around the positioning is useful. But Priyanka Chopra is doing this. I mean, if there is in fact some thought that's gone into how these products are actually being made that's differentiated, that someone can't replicate, I hope that that will carry it forward.
Thanks, Anand. I'm gonna actually move you back to the audience if that's
sure.
Thanks.
And
ask Varun to unmute himself and ask his question. Varun, are you still there?
Yep. Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Just a quick intro. So I've done a couple of startups. I'm based in San Francisco, currently in marketing, and sort of head up engagement and retention marketing at Adobe. And so, content is something that we're thinking about every day in the context of how do we retain some of our users, right? But I think going back to content and branding in the context of startups, so Mita and Lulu, I think you sort of touched on this, but I keep questioning myself, and I think one of you mentioned product market fit, right? In 2014, we launched a startup in India with a small pilot in Bangalore called Let's Chai. And the concept was just to connect people so that, they can potentially find a brighter groom, right? And so in a sense, it was a dating app. When we came into the market, I think the first thought we had, and we thought about branding because I'm marketing, was let's focus on the age group of maybe 19 to 25-year-olds, right? And so we really started pushing content, however we speak to that audience. But soon we found that the actual market that were signing up for the program were 27 to 41-year-olds. And so we had to pivot fast. So I guess the question here is more, how do you really balance? Because, in the case of a startup, you're 2 or 3 people, right? You're really focusing on the product, you're focusing on who your right audience is, but then you add in the brand. And so how do you really balance that? And is branding really something that, it makes sense in a Jessica Alba, it makes sense with, let's say, Priyanka Chopra, because they already have a specific type of following. But let's take for normal people like us, and I'll speak for myself because you guys are probably more celebrities. But how does that work? How does that balance work?
So Varun, what I would ask you is, how did you assume that your target audience was going to be the 90 to 25-year-olds?
So because I'm based in the US, right? So I'm looking at the audience and who's really interacting with people here. Some of the startups here, and I think we went in with people who are in the later stage of college. We understood women typically get married earlier. At that time, at least, parents were pushing for it, and so we started focusing on a specific market. But soon we realized it wasn't it.
Yeah, so I would say that perhaps the process, the problem perhaps was less with the fact that you had to pivot very quickly and change what your brand, the way your brand communicated, and perhaps a little more with the fact that the sort of the research wasn't deep enough with the target or to identify really who the target audience was. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes and no, right? Because I think sometimes the research is done as you're on the ground as well, right? So you're gaining insights as you're working on it. Hence, a lot of companies spend millions of dollars just failing on projects so that they deliver insights. But the challenge is that branding, right? That branding piece. Do you focus on the product? Do you focus on who that product fits, which market, and then you focus on branding?
Yeah.
Or do you sort of ingrain it right from day one, which kind of pigeonholes you a little bit?
But branding, by its very definition, is derived after you understand who your target audience is. You build a brand with a certain, you position a brand for a certain audience. That's what makes it sharp. Like it's hard to position a brand for everyone.
I mean, I would turn it back on you a bit, Varun, and say, maybe we're thinking about brand differently. Some of the comments that you made, for people like me, or I'm not a celebrity, how are you thinking about brand? What do you feel is brand or branding?
Well, in this sort of context of content, right? And like, let's take the YouTube influencers. There are many influencers today that focus on beauty, right? It started with, hey, I found this product, I'm going to put some makeup, and then they sort of get some following, right? There's this girl here in the US, I think she's pretty big worldwide, called DP Cam. And so she said, let's put lipstick to remove your black circles underneath. And then that worked. Many people started following her. People commented, engaged with her content, and now she has her own brand. But that sort of transition happened because she had a specific type of audience already, and that audience just followed her through, right? So that transition happened because of the content that she created. Now, in a case of a startup, let's say you're in a tech startup, you're not necessarily building that content and that following right from the beginning. You're basically going and trying to find that audience, to see, is it a B2B customer that would be the right audience for me? Is it the B2C customer that is the right audience? And even that, which is the demographic, right? If we're looking at a investment startup idea, is it the middle-aged folks? Should I target the early, people are just graduating college? Should I target later stage? Like, so you haven't really figured that out yet. And so I think, Meeta, I think you mentioned this, but it almost sounds like you were leaning on, get that product market fit first, and then sort of focus on the brand.
I think that's important. So it's, of course, you can't, again, this is my personal opinion, product market fit is a journey. It's not as if you just say boom and Sandeep, please weigh in here, but that hockey stick growth and all it's lovely startup lore, but you have to keep working on product market fit. But I would definitely say that you have to go in with a reasonable assumption about where is the center of gravity of your target audience. of course, you can expand the boundaries, but to say that you're not sure whether it's the college kids or the mid-30s is perhaps too wide to go in with.
I was just going to add, if it's truly human-centric, you're starting with a consumer in mind for whom you're solving a problem. And then you're trying to assess, how big is that market? Can I serve that market profitably? So, I mean, to Meeta's point, more than products, start with the consumer need. And that's what design thinking and all of the tools of design thinking really teach us, right? To be very user-centric. And so therein might be some clues.
Thanks, Varun. Just gonna ask a broader question to the full sort of panel that we have here. I've been thinking a lot about like the evolution of brand and how brands have to evolve as consumer behavior changes. And I would love to know from Dhruv, how do you think content can help keep a brand relevant?
So I feel that this has been covered in the context of a different answer earlier. I don't really think content can keep a brand relevant, right? I think content in and of itself doesn't really mean anything. I think it's about understanding, again, what is your purpose as a brand? What's the journey that you're on? What's the journey that you want to take your community along? And then you got to figure out how does that manifest. So Mansi, I really wanted to answer one of your earlier questions, and I'm going to combine it in this answer when you were just asking us about our favorite brands and examples, right? So for me, my favorite brand in India is Royal Enfield. I am an owner of one of their motorcycles. I really love everything that the brand does. And your question got me thinking about what they actually do. And I feel like when I look at their, let's say, content, quote unquote, I wouldn't say it's absolutely the best. I wouldn't say that their ads are like, leagues apart everyone else. I wouldn't say that they're killing it on social media. And yet I think every single member of that community really does feel a very deep bond with the brand, because the things that they do, they're not necessarily super scalable, but they're really meaningful, right? So for example, on digital, they recently ran like drawing contests and design contests. They run these beautiful community rides where they bring, sort of different niche communities and just combine them together. They did this very famous Astral ride where they took a bunch of photographers who love to ride, took them to Leh Ladakh, Manali, and it was like a riding and astral photography trip. So I feel like, content is not really, content, it's like, as Meeta was saying earlier, I think it can create a lot of leverage. And I think everyone's capable of doing it, right? Because content can be absolutely anything. It can be a conversation, a snippet of sound, a piece of art, a novel, a book, a tweet. And I think it's just about understanding, like, for you, which way are you most comfortable? Which medium are you most comfortable to express yourself in? For instance, like in a different context, not a startup context, but I'm really glad that Haruki Murakami, the novelist, doesn't spend all of his time on Twitter, right? Like writing tweets every day. I'm really glad that the guy goes into a cave and writes like one insane, surreal, trippy story after the next. And that's what he's just really good at. He doesn't really need to play the other game because his content, his core art is of such fundamentally like high quality. So yeah, I think it's about understanding who you are and how you want to express yourself, and then just figure out the mediums that work for you.
Dhruv, you brought up a cool story with that Royal Enfield thing. And I think experiences and facilitating experiences are such an interesting component of what product companies need to think about. And we've seen this with Nike and their run club, and actually facilitating people getting together and running. SoulCycle thinks of themselves more as a community of people that come together than necessarily a gym. And so actually, Lulu, I was gonna ask you, do you guys incorporate this into your thinking when you're working with clients to say, listen, let's forget about communication for a bit, and let's think a little bit about how to create this type of experiential engagement with your product, whatever that product might be?
Oh, absolutely. I think Mansi was beginning to talk about how branding has evolved, and Meeta will tell you this. Brand, it was described as a promise before. Today is all about the experience. And it's really about thinking about the experience, Sandeep, in very holistic terms, right? You have physical components of the experience, the human components of the experience, the digital components of the experience. Think of PHD as a nifty acronym. That's really the way to create value for your brand. I'll give you an example, something that we've worked on in the Brazilian market. Take a chocolate like Kit Kat. They've actually created the Kit Kat chocolatery in Sao Paulo, which is a wonderfully experiential way in which you actually engage with the Kit Kat brand. So you don't go to a retail store, buy it and consume it. You walk into this beautiful, digitally oriented store where through augmented reality and all sorts of other digital interventions, you can actually engage with the brand in such a fantastic way. Another example in the automotive industry, I don't know if you've heard of Lynk & Co. It's a brand out of China, launching a car brand without actually having cars in the showroom. You go in there and the entire experience is around actually booking your car and having it delivered to your house. So absolutely, brands today are thinking so much about that layer of experience. If you think about the 1950s, it was just about the image. But today, image alone is not important. The first and most important, the core is product. The layer around it is experience, service and experience. And then of course, branding is still important. I think sometimes people may think it's just the product and experience, but that layer of branding is still important. And this middle layer of experience is something that a lot of companies are looking at right now to create differentiation beyond the product functionality.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, I was just going to add to Lulu's point and say that if you're able to create these amazing brand experiences, then very often that is really the source of your content. You don't need to create any other content, even in say Royal Enfield's example, right? When you have these amazing offline experiences, all you're doing is capturing them and distributing them. So it isn't a separate content creation exercise in the way that most people think about it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, right? I mean, the traditional mindset had been to silo everything out and say that this is this and this is your job and this is your job and this is your job. And actually, in fact, the culmination of a lot of the combined sort of synergistic efforts is what comes out as the brand. And I guess that's how these different pieces tie together. But I had another thought as you guys were talking about this, to say that, okay, now we have, I guess, decided that you have a product that's really good, you have an experience that you're going to layer into it. And then oftentimes this question becomes, I need endorsement of this. I need celebrity sort of backing to actually make this something. Or that's one lens of it. And the other is I need above the line marketing dollars to spend, because I've done these things. I got a good product, I got this. Do you agree that at some point that is a necessary part of the equation? Or is it generally that, look, if you've got these things, we're in a world where it doesn't have to be that way anymore. Let's just take Google as an example. They didn't spend a lot of money on marketing Google. It just is a useful tool. Is that the way many people can go, or is that something that you think is for the select few, and eventually you're going to need to play that game as well?
Sorry, I think it depends entirely on what kind of business you're in, Sandeep. So if you're a SaaS company or a productivity tool or something, then do you need celebrities? Probably not. When do you need celebrities? You need celebrities when you're trying to scale up and reach a huge volume of people who are influenced by those celebrities. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think it really depends on who your target audience is and at what stage in your journey you're at. because you really only need those massive above, ATL efforts and celebrity branding when you've reached a certain scale.
Yeah, I would agree with Meeta, and the truth is, in the Indian context, for many categories like laptops or hard goods, etc., celebrities do make a difference. There's a lot of research which shows that every time there are ads by the celebrities, there is a huge spike in sales. I know in the advertising and branding circles, we are fond of dissing the whole celebrity approach, saying that you shouldn't make your brand depend on a celebrity, but the fact is it works in India. Cricket, Bollywood, it does work if you're trying to reach the mass market. So I agree with Meeta, back to her point of if it's B2B online, you can use, so an important distinction is owned media and rented media. If you're in a category where your own media can actually help you create that brand awareness and preference, then you don't need a celebrity.
So there was a interesting event, which I think was actually a Lightbox a number of years ago. You may remember with one of the strategy folks from Groupon. And we had this conversation with him about celebrities, because I moved to India in 2017. And I was fascinated by the amount of just celebrities on billboards. And I asked him, why is that such a focus for so many consumer brands here? And he seemed to feel that it's all about tackling the trust deficit, right? The fact that there's just not a lot of consumer trust. People are just really, really suspicious whenever anyone asks them to part with any kind of money. And you are essentially just by putting a face on a billboard that they know, that they love, or at least they've seen a million times before, it cultivates trust really, really quickly. So I think that's quite an interesting lens to think about the matter of growth, and whether it's a celebrity or whether you're creating a product that is inherently, can grow. For instance, like in the context of a B2B SaaS tool or a platform like Slack, right? You don't need to see a celebrity, but if your colleague is sending you a link to a cool tool to try it out, that's great. That there's already inherent trust there. So then it's all a matter of just almost brokering trust, and do whatever it is that you need to cultivate trust quickly, because if there's a lot of trust, then inevitably growth is going to follow that.
I also think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mansi.
No, I was just going to add on there and say that I also think that trust is being replaced now with Amazon and brands selling through the Amazon marketplaces, because you see great scale despite brands not necessarily being household names on Amazon. And that's because I think the trust has gone from maybe a celebrity endorser to your consumer reviews and your other types of your sort of social proof, I guess. So that's interesting to see that evolution there.
And yet, I buy Nani cement because Amitabh Bachchan is endorsing it.
You do. So he's, of course, a lot of research is done into this every year, and year after year, the research returns the same results. Who would I trust the most when it came to buying something? And the answer is always Mr. Bachchan. So it's the industry does this every year, and every year they get the same answer.
Then what did you say yesterday or 2 days ago? The only thing India cares about is ABCD.
Astrology, Bollywood, content, and devotion.
I think it was
cricket and devotion. Yeah, not content. You're wrong. Yeah. No, that was the first lesson I was taught when I came back, and it still holds true. I think I was having this conversation with someone where we were talking about mental health, and they pointed out that astrology and an astrology business was actually seen as a way by which to help people find peace and mental calmness, because it was a way by which they were, I guess, getting a lot of their issues resolved. And that conversation with the astrologer was all about actually releasing and letting that out. Very different topic, but yeah, I think that is a reality.
Maybe for the next consumer we can talk about astrology. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for today. It's 10 p.m. So just wanted to be conscious of everyone's time. especially on a Thursday night. Just wanted to say thank you so much to Dhruv, Meeta, Sandeep, and Lulu. Thanks again for joining us, all of your valuable insights on content and brand. This has been a really, really fun talk. And hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And hope to see you guys, on another consumer huddle sometime soon.
Thanks.
Great, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
A lot of fun. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye.
Bye.